This video is kind of a pseudo-sequel to my last video about why Crystal Dynamics should have made an X-Men game instead of an Avengers one, and should still make one. But it got me thinking, while I detailed in that video which heroes would be the most likely and most logically easiest to develop for a game, it's not necessarily who I want. Like, who I want in an X-Men game is based not only on my own favoritism, but who would lend for the best gameplay and story. So I want to do a video about that too. Assuming the game would start with 6 characters like Marvel's Avengers did, I have 6 characters who wouldn't necessarily be the easiest to make the game around, but who I think would be the most fun and engaging, both from a gameplay and a story standpoint. First off, there has to be Cyclops. I know it may be strange to say that he has to be in it before, say, Wolverine, but I honestly don't think Wolverine is key to a good X-Men story or game like I do Cyclops. He's the best leader of the X-Men when he hasn't lost his mind and given up on Xavier's dream. He understands how to truly fight for mutant equality and how to properly use his teammates' powers in the field. If he's not in the game as team leader, any faith I have in an X-Men game story immediately drops. He's the one who can lead the X-Men through any threat and should. In terms of gameplay, he should have the simplest and honestly most addicting gameplay loop. Blasting Sentinels and supervillains away with a glance is the ultimate power fantasy, while at the same time it's not utterly broken and overpowered. If they work in a kind of intensity mode for his visor with a cooldown function, you could keep his gameplay from being overly easy. And anyone who thinks just blasting a straight line would be boring after a while, you would be right, except for the fact that Cyclops does more than shoot straight. Another reason to have an intensity switch for his visor would be to control whether his blasts bounce off surfaces. In the comics, Cyclops can bounce his laser beams off surfaces just as well, if not better than how Captain America throws his shield. Even if it's just for a super, playing with Cyclops' surface bouncing powers would be a blast. Second would be Jean Grey, or Marvel Girl, depending on which name you want to go by. I wouldn't use Phoenix because I think that would be too overpowered for a game. Focusing on her telekinetic powers would give players the environmental destruction we could use in Marvel's Avengers right now. It's not massively important, but it would be insanely fun to pick up objects and then chuck them, or mind control human enemies to keep them from attacking for a few seconds. I honestly picture Jean Grey playing a lot like the main character from Control. While she is overpowered, her powers are perfect to fit in a good superhero game, and having her in the story gives the team his brains. I wouldn't go so far to say she's the heart of the team, because I think other characters do that better, but having her as another team leader to help Cyclops would be great. Honestly, I'm getting excited at the prospect of a character who's dedicated to only using the powers the main character in Control had, minus the guns. Just don't make a love triangle between her, Cyclops, and Wolverine. I say this because Wolverine is my third pick. I'm sure you're probably wondering why it took so long for me to say Wolverine. I mean, come on, sure. I don't think he's necessary for a good story, but there's no way I don't want him in it. And there's no way there's ever an X-Men game that he's not in. I mean, I guess there was X-Men Destiny, but we don't talk about that game. There's truly nothing that should play like stabbing Sentinels with the claws on Wolverine's hands. They're a berserker fantasy where Cyclops' beams is a power fantasy. You just want to tear things apart. They could take pointers from the X-Men Origins Wolverine game, made by Activision and Raven Software. That game was better than it had any right to be, honestly. And while this game definitely wouldn't be half as violent, taking some abilities like Wolverine's long jump and God of War-like combos would be beyond fun. I'm not quite sure if that would be as possible. Probably really unlikely, but I don't know. I can want what I want. I can dream. And in terms of story, I would like to see him take up more of a mentorship role to my last character of this pseudo wish list. Wolverine can be the stoic, brooding badass he usually is. It would be nice to see him be a tough but caring hard ass to other members of the team. Of course, afterwards is Storm. I'll admit, she isn't actually one of my favorite X-Men, and while she would be the one character so far who would play very similarly to another character, she's a mainstay. She's the next best team leader after Cyclops, and her weather powers make for wicked third-person shooting powers. Of all of the characters, I can best picture what Storm would play like, from her lightning to her wind blast to the tornadoes she creates to the flooding rains. Storm's powers may not sound like it on paper, but she was made for a video game. Then there's the story potential she brings, being the once and current queen of Wakanda, depending on which way they'd like to take the story. She immediately opens up a whole new continent of locations to explore. Outside of Wolverine, Storm's backstory brings up cool locations for the team to go, assuming an X-Men game made by Crystal Dynamics would use the same world map like they do in Marvel's Avengers. Having Storm's connection to Kenya and Wakanda brings in 2 varied and interesting locales, past the generic forests in the current Avengers game. God, if I have to slink through the next goddamn tree trunk. I don't know how they made Utah and Montana look the same, or whatever the other state that was. They picked the most boring states to play in. God. Now, my penultimate pick would be Iceman. Of all of the X-Men I would put into a game, I pick Iceman purely for gameplay reasons. I've never found him all that interesting from a character standpoint, and his backstory isn't bringing in any villains or locations like Wolverine and Storm, but the way he fights and moves would make for what would likely be the most fun character to play. Having him fly around by shooting ice at his feet and sliding everywhere is dope. Having him freeze people like a third-person shooter would be amazing. Maybe even freezing a whole room for super would make for the perfect team combos with the other members of the team. The best use of Iceman's powers outside of the comics would probably be from Frozone and Incredibles 2. Like, remember how he moved, how his character was animated? Wouldn't you want to play that? If nothing else, Iceman is perfect for comedic relief. And for my last character, probably the most unconventional X-Men character for a video game, not because of her popularity, but because of her powers, would be Shadowcat, or Ariel, or Sprite, or Star-Lord, or whatever you want to call her. Kitty Pryde should be a playable character in a Crystal Dynamics style X-Men game. I know what you're thinking, her power is walking through things, not great for a game. I would tell you, you're probably right if you lack imagination. Kitty Pryde can do more than just walk through things. She's also a pirate, a master samurai, and the owner of a purple dragon named Lockheed. Her walking through things would be her R2 power-up. If you've played Marvel's Avengers, you know what I'm talking about. Where she walks through enemies, she can also deal damage and be unable to have her combos interrupted. And her regular combos would be a mix between using swords, Lockheed's Fire Blast, and martial arts. Whether or not she uses a katana or pirate swords would depend on whether or not Crystal Dynamics wants to adapt the current X-Men status quo, or more classic settings like at Xavier's School for Gifted Children. Either way, her combos would have no excuse to be anything other than absolutely sick. I honestly believe that mixing her powers and skills into an action game would probably make for the most fun and varied character in an X-Men game. And if we're being honest, the hardest part will be deciding on what to call her. Just kidding, that's totally not what would be the hardest thing. But seriously though, I don't know how likely this game would be, let alone this cast. It's kind of ridiculous how the X-Men haven't gotten their own game this console generation. Hell, I guess it's also kind of surprising that the Avengers took so long to get their own. But honestly, the moment Disney bought Fox, an X-Men game should have been greenlit along with the Avengers game, like immediately. Outside of the X-Men just being the better team for a video game and being the better team period, the X-Men have a history of success with video games. Marvel, Disney, and Square Enix should get on that. If Marvel's Avengers dies before its time, X-Men is the way to make a comeback. And please, don't make that Guardians of the Galaxy game, Square. Make an X-Men game instead. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. You know, the works. Follow me on Twitter at Something Central, Instagram at Something Central CK, where I post memes, and the Facebook page. If you're looking for something original to read, try my amateur books that I've published on Amazon. I've done a variety of stuff. One of them should hopefully pique your interest, unless you don't like reading. Leave the X-Men you'd want in a game in the comments below.